everybody. How's everybody doing? This is Mike Barnett, and welcome to King Jing Things, where we talk about anything with King Jing. Uh, King Jing, thanks for having me as always, and I'm excited to talk today about the NBA play-in tournament. I like the NBA, but I would be lying if I talked as if I was an avid watcher. I'm normally first 10 games, and then I'll watch the Hawks, and then pretty much anything after that, as soon as till we get to the playoffs, I'm pretty neutral. But for King Jing, I know that's his favorite sport and something that he loves to talk about. So Jing, thanks for having me as always, and I'm excited to learn more about the NBA play-in tournament.
I appreciate you hopping on and sort of helping me guide through what we're going to talk about here. Obviously, I've done a couple of solo videos on my own, but it's a lot easier just being able to bounce off, another person. And the NBA is obviously a sport that I keep up with the entire season. I would not consider myself a casual. Um, I'm definitely excited to get into this little play-in preview because I think we might have an exciting play-in tournament this year.
Yeah, I agree. And I think just from talking to you, I've learned a lot. So let's get right into it and tell us more about how the play-in started and how long it's been around.
So they started this play-in tournament back in 2020 during the bubble. I don't know if you remember, but they didn't do it necessarily how they're doing it now. But I think if you're like 4 games out, you could still be considered the ninth seed or the 10th seed, and you were still able to, make a push for the playoffs. And they sort of took this idea and implemented the following year, and ever since then. So this is the fifth official year that they've been doing this style of the tournament. You have the 1 through 6 seeds on each of the conferences that are already locks for the playoffs. And then you have the teams 7 through 10 in the standings for each conference. They compete in like a little mini tournament where they decide who gets the 7th seed and who gets the 8th seed. So the NBA originally implemented this to address like structural problems that we were seeing with casual fans, late season engagement, as well as the teams. Obviously, I think looking back at it, the NBA is uh, uh, a league where you see a lot of teams just straight up tanking. They do not want to win games. They're strictly looking into the next season, and sometimes the tanking can begin halfway through the season. You're seeing this with the Utah Jazz right now, where they have unapologetically just not tried to win games. You've seen the Sixers during their whole the process era. They were doing the same thing. So the NBA wanted to implement this to sort of combat that problem a little bit, as well as keep viewership interesting towards March. Obviously, you're going up against March Madness. You might get a little bit of a boost in ratings right after the trade deadline if a lot of bigger names are being moved. Like we saw this year, Jimmy Butler got moved to the Warriors. So that sort of picks up a little bit of viewership in February, but you see a steep decline for the rest of the season. So this is supposed to get like the casual fan to be a little bit more interested, and that's why we have this little play-in tournament. So yeah, obviously the league has faced challenges over the past few years, which is the tanking and as well as middling teams where they might not necessarily be good enough to make a playoff push, like those 10, 11 seeds, but they're also not bad enough to try to get a top 5 pick in the draft lottery. So it sort of incentivizes these teams to continue to fight at the end of the season. And then you add a NCAA March Madness style mini tournament where it creates like a dramatic do or die playoff atmosphere. So theoretically, the play-in is supposed to boost late season viewership for the casual fan, and then it creates more nationally broadcasted games for teams that don't necessarily get it, like the Hawks, the Bulls. They don't really get these nationally broadcasted games like the Lakers typically do, or like the Knicks.
Great. Uh, I think for me too, to understand, like, can you dive a little more into the structure as far as like, so I know it's 7 to 10, but how did those games work, and does 7 get an advantage over 10?
Yeah, so the way that it's broken up, and it's a little bit confusing for the casual fan, which is probably my only complaint about the play-in. I think it does more good than wrong here. So the regular season seventh and eighth seeds, they play each other. And whoever wins that game, they automatically get the seventh seed in the playoffs. And then the ninth and the 10th seeds, they play each other. And then this is where it sort of becomes that do or die atmosphere. So whoever wins the 9 and 10 game, they go on to face the losing team of the seventh and eighth seed game. And then whoever wins that game gets the eighth seed in the playoffs. So winner of 9 and 10 goes on to play loser of 7 and 8 for that last spot. And then whoever wins the 7 and 8 matchup gets that seventh spot.
Gotcha. Well, that's cool. And who are the through 10 teams playing? And I'm assuming it's the East and the West, correct?
Yeah. It's broken up into the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference. In the Western Conference, you have the Golden State Warriors. They're the seventh seed. You have the Memphis Grizzlies. They're going to be the eighth seed. The Sacramento Kings are the ninth seed. And then the very polarizing Dallas Mavericks, they are in the 10th seed. And then you have the Eastern Conference where we have the Orlando Magic with the seventh seed. Our Atlanta Hawks have the eighth seed. The Chicago Bulls get the ninth seed, and then the Miami Heat are in the 10th seed. So you will see the Warriors Grizzlies matchup, the Kings Mavericks matchup, Magic Hawks matchup, and the Bulls Heat matchup. Just a couple extra tidbits. I did a little bit of research before this. This is the fourth season in the row that the Hawks have made the play-in tournament. Also, the past three seasons, the Heat and the Bulls have also made the play-in. So you, at least in the Eastern Conference, you see similar teams popping up here. Um, the casual fan might end up seeing this and say, "Oh, since these teams are constantly making the playoffs or the play-in, they typically don't have anything to show for it." I don't know if you remember this, but I believe it was the 2023 playoffs, the Heat ended up coming into the playoffs as a play-in team, and they made it all the way to the finals. Now they ended up losing to the Denver Nuggets in that series, but it just shows that yeah, you can end up on one of these like middling teams, but still, once you make it to the playoffs, like anything can happen.
And I think that's the excited part about playoffs in sport, right? Like we're looking for anything to be possible to happen. And I think, from our conversations and what you've taught me, the West is really strong this year. So let's start there. Let's start with the 7 and 8 game. Tell me more about it and what you think might actually happen.
Sure. So the Western Conference matchup for the 7th, 8th seed, I said, was the Warriors and the Grizzlies. So they are obviously fighting for the seventh seed in the playoffs. Uh, you mentioned it. The Western Conference is historically better than the Eastern Conference, so I think these games are going to be a little bit more interesting. But for the Warriors Grizzlies matchup in general, they do have home court. The Warriors have home court advantage, and we've seen it over the years. Their arena is probably one of the best like playoff atmospheres that a fan base can create. So I do think the Warriors have a really good advantage there in this matchup. The Warriors averaged 114 points per game, and that ended up landing them ninth overall in points per game in the Western Conference. So they obviously have the firepower, and then they also have the veteran leadership that they can stay competitive and really put pressure on the Grizzlies defense. Obviously, you have Steph Curry, who, if he's hot, then he's hot. He can do absolutely anything. You have Draymond Green, who is currently the favorite to win the Defensive Player of the Year award. Not my Defensive Player of the Year, but that's a whole nother conversation. But they also added Jimmy Butler during the trade deadline. And as we both know, watching the Heat over the years, Jimmy Butler is very much a playoff riser when it comes to the occasion. He thrives in these high stressful situations. So I think when you have that much veteran leadership, then you can sort of run anybody off of the court at that point. Some big question marks that I do have about the Warriors, though, is that they have lost a lot of big games at the end of the season. We just saw yesterday they ended up landing themselves in the play-in tournament because they lost an overtime game to the Clippers yesterday. The Grizzlies also have a lot of offensive threats out there, so they can put a lot of pressure on the Warriors defense as well, especially considering they're more of an older team. Um, the Grizzlies ended up averaging close to 122 points per game this season, and that's with Ja Morant kind of having an iffy season. So you know their offense is pretty lethal this year. It'll just be interesting to see if the Warriors can like what they can do to slow it down. But if there is a team that I sort of believe in slowing down an offense, I guess it would be the Warriors. They just have all of that playoff experience. They're used to these high levels or high pressure situation games. So they're actually 9-6 in clutch games this year. So that's pretty indicative of their ability to play under pressure. The problem with the Grizzlies that I have is that they don't play well when they are at home or when they're not at home. They have a 22-19 record when they are in away games, and they also have the third most turnovers out of any team in the NBA this year. So the Grizzlies sort of need to look at what they're doing, slow the ball a little bit. You don't need to outscore. I mean, obviously you have to outscore the Warriors here, but uh, just play your brand of basketball, slow it down. Don't get tense in these environments, and you have a shot at winning. I do believe this is going to be a very competitive game. The Grizzlies have Ja Morant, Desmond Bain, and Jaren Jackson Jr. All very capable of taking over a game. And I think that even though the Warriors are heavy favorites at this point, I believe they're at a minus 300 at this point. There is a world where the Grizzlies end up taking over the game and winning. Uh, However, the Grizzlies did a very wild move 2 weeks before the playoffs started. They fired their head coach. And I think that shows that they're kind of willing to punt this season away and just start focusing on next year. Um, but personally, to me, I think that the Warriors take this matchup and that they go ahead and get that seventh seed.
Before we jump into 9 and 10, what is your over under if I put it at 1.5 on John Morant weapon celebrations?
It depends what you consider a weapon.
Grenades,
Are we these are
guns. You
weapons?
can't do grenades or a weapon for sure.
We'll take the over here. I personally am a big fan of the Archer celebration. Uh, I think Jamal Murray sort of made that popular over the years, but like, come on, that's just clean. You're not promoting guns, and I've seen a lot of people on social media and stuff, giving the NBA a hard time with John Morant, and it's like, why are you getting onto them? You see a lot of NBA players using the gun celebration. Uh, it's basketball, I get it, but when you have a track record like John Morant does, I think it would just be better to, you know, try to stay out of the spotlight for a little bit. Focus on basketball.
I think that is the most important part is like just whether he's right or wrong to do it. Just don't do it for yourself to just disappear. And if you were playing spectacular this year, fine, but you're not. So now you're just putting more burden on yourself. But anyway, jumping into 9 and 10 in the West. Let's talk about that game, but let's also talk about so if you think the Warriors are going to come out in game 7, let's talk about the next game as well.
Well, so like if they end up winning that game, they or the Warriors, they clinch that seventh spot, so they won't
Yep.
have to play again. So it does come down to the 9-10 matchup, which is I mentioned before, the Kings and the Mavericks. The Kings have swept the Mavericks this season in their regular season matchups. So the Kings obviously are the ninth seed here. They do have home court advantage, and that is another like low key playoff environment that is sort of built up. Obviously, the Kings went on a long streak without making the playoffs. They finally broke through that. So I know those fans are very thirsty for a good competitive series. Domantas Sabonis, the star for the Kings, he historically plays very well against Anthony Davis, who obviously is now on the Mavericks. He has a 10-4 record against him, but those four losses have come in their past four matchups. I guess that means that they haven't really gotten to play each other this year, unless it was against the Lakers when Anthony Davis was still there. But I do find that a little bit intriguing that the four last games Anthony Davis has played pretty well. But since the trade deadline, which is very big in this situation just because both teams have made very drastic moves. Obviously, the Kings traded away their star point guard in De'Aaron Fox, and then they traded with the Bulls to bring in Zach LaVine. Also, during the offseason, they traded for the Bulls' DeMar DeRozan. So, um, and then, it goes without saying the Mavericks traded Luka Doncic away and ended up netting Anthony Davis in this trade. So I'm looking at their stats from the trade deadline through the rest of the season. The Kings ranked the 19th best offense, which is below average, and the Mavs have ranked 24th. The Kings have a couple big question marks. Malik Monk, I don't believe he's going to be playing in the play-in game. He has a calf injury, and I believe Shams reported that he will be out for 2 weeks. So I'm not expecting Malik Monk to be a part of this game. Also, the Kings have a terrible defensive rating. I think they were ranked 22nd in defensive efficiency since the deadline. So that could obviously pose big problems for them in the long run. The Mavericks, they have everything to prove. They traded away Luka Doncic. Obviously, their general manager has been getting nothing but hate, well-deserved hate. Not trying to take anything away, but I do think a lot of people forget the fact that Anthony Davis on a night-to-night basis can still be a top 5 player in the NBA. So if he's healthy and he has it on, then he can certainly provide a lot of things that Luka Doncic just couldn't. Obviously, Luka had the playmaking ability, but the GM Nico Harrison came out and said we made this trade so that we get better on the defensive end, and that is something that Anthony Davis can bring when he is healthy. Now, that's the asterisk, as long as he's healthy. Right now, Anthony Davis is listed on the injury report. We don't know if he's going to end up playing. Personally, I think he will, but that's more of a wait and see. I think they play Wednesday night. They do have veteran experience with the Mavs. They went and got Klay Thompson, which is obviously a very valuable piece in high pressure situations such as this one. If he has it on, then he can easily put up 30 points a night if they need him to. Um, Another big question mark is we saw right after the trade deadline, Kyrie Irving ends up going down with an ACL tear. And I don't know if we're going to end up seeing him next season. We're obviously not going to be seeing him this season in the playoffs. But so with him out, Anthony Davis on the injury report, Klay Thompson also popped up on the injury report. And then their two younger guys, PJ Washington and Derek Lively, they are all listed on the injury report for the play-in matchup. So, like I said, there is a chance that the Mavericks end up just saying, "Hey, we'll stay. We'll try to get healthy, and it doesn't really matter if we make the playoffs this year." Um, they also have a very questionable depth off of the bench, so that's another spot where I think the Kings might, have the advantage there. As of right now, the Kings are minus 210 favorites. That can fluctuate if we do hear good news about everybody that I just mentioned. But as long as we're using the information that I have right now, I'm definitely leaning the Kings.
I feel that for sure. And I mean, yeah, I think I don't just from my own casual personal benefit, betting on the Mavs might not be a terrible idea if they're not favored, especially if all those guys do end up coming off that injury report. And as a loose better and just making bad bets, I'm sure that's something I would do. So don't do that. The last thing I want to ask you before we move to the East, if Luka Doncic is still on the Mavericks, are they a 10 seed this year?
Probably not. I'm not saying they would necessarily have made it out of the play-in. They could have been a seventh seed in this situation, but I don't know. I am a big proponent for Luka Doncic. I have watched him since he was 15 years old. I was very disappointed when the Hawks had him and then inevitably traded him away for Trae Young. Love Trae Young, but Trae Young is not Luka Doncic. So I'm going to say the Mavericks probably wouldn't have made the playoffs, especially if you're still considering that Kyrie Irving goes down with that ACL tear. Uh, but dude, if you have Luka Doncic on your team, like anything is possible. I just it still baffles me. It's not as bad of a trade as everybody made it seem. But when you have a perennial MVP candidate like Luka Doncic, you don't trade him away. I know there's been stuff of like critiques on him on the court, whether it's like him bitching towards the refs or off court. You saw last year when they made the fucking finals, when they ended up clinching the Western Conference Finals. You saw one of the coaches come and take the beer out of Luka's hands. My guy enjoys a nice cold one every now and then. That shouldn't be a problem if he's continuously putting up the stats that he is. So I think the Mavs sort of just made a big deal out of absolutely nothing.
I agree with you, and it's still crazy that, and they're getting a ton of backlash still, and they deserve it. So we'll see what that ends up turning into, and I'm excited to watch these two games. And let's not get into what the hypothetical next game would be, but let's say Grizzlies Kings make it to the next game. Who wins?
I'm taking the Grizzlies easily. The Kings just have too bad of a defense. I think the Grizzlies can step it up on the defensive end, especially with Jaren Jackson Jr. Um, but if I was a betting man, which I am, I'm going with the Grizzlies in that matchup,
Oh,
hypothetically.
cool. All right, let's go to the East then. Let's start with the 7 and 8 teams. So we got the Magic and the Hawks. Obviously, we both are rooting for the Hawks to win that game, but let's dive a little bit deeper and tell me what you're thinking.
The Magic is obviously the seventh seed, so they have home court advantage. I don't know if that is much of an advantage as, like I mentioned with the Warriors or the Kings. But I know they have some hungry fans down there waiting for the Magic to make an impact in the playoffs. So, um, maybe they'll show up there. This season they played 4 games. One of them was actually played yesterday. All 4 of their games were in the latter half of the season, and they split the season series 2-2. Um, Granted, last night none of the starters either played or played meaningful minutes, so you could probably just toss that game out the window here. As of right now, the Magic are favored to win the game. They're 200 or minus 200 favorites. The last time I checked. So obviously Vegas thinks that the Magic are easily going to win this game. This season, the Magic were able to hold the Hawks to 112 points in 3 out of the 4 games, not including the one, or if we don't include the one from last night, where, like I said, nobody meaningful played. Um, and the Hawks ended up averaging 118 points over the season. So this is very indicative of the Magic's defense. They ended the season with the lowest points per game allowed across the entire uh, you know, all of the teams. So you could say the Magic probably have the best defense in the league as of right now. The Magic play very hard nosed physical defense, and when you play like that, it's typically designed to slow down fast paced offense, which is what the Hawks have. So this will be a brutal matchup for the Hawks. The Magics do have big questions, though. Uh, we talk about how well of a defense that they are. They have one of the worst half court offenses in the league. I think they're like bottom 3. You've got guys like Paulo Banchero, you have Franz Wagner as the 2 main focal points running your offense. But besides that, you don't really have much shot creation, and that's going to end up becoming a problem from them in a playoff environment. Um, as well as the three. Last year they weren't able to hit the three. You see them go out and they signed Contavious Caldwell Pope. They're going to try to bolster that 3-point percentage. It didn't really work out for them. They've shot a little bit better as the season has gone on, especially these last couple of weeks. But at the end of the season, they were still ranked the worst 3-point shooting team in the league. So we got to sit down and think: is their 3-point shooting going to be reliable in the playoffs here? They also have a very young and an inexperienced team. They haven't made the playoffs. They don't have that experience. So since this is essentially Orlando's first like high stakes postseason environment, there is a chance that the pressure really gets to them. Now we get into our Hawks. We've got Trae Young. He's having an incredible season. He's averaging 24 points and almost 12 assists. So I think the Hawks are really going to have to rely on Trae Young's leadership here. Um, they are a very clutch team. They're 17 and 13 in clutch situations. That ranks them the second best in the league, believe it or not. So they've showcased the ability and the experience to get over like little tight spots over the entirety of the season. So they could potentially capitalize on the Magic's lack of experience here. The only downside is the Magic's offense obviously sucks. the Hawks also have a really bad defense. They're bottom five in defensive rating over the span of the season. They give up very easy buckets in transition with their current personnel, and it definitely hurts that Jalen Johnson is injured and is not going to be playing in this game. Um, so my prediction here is actually the Hawks end up stealing one from the Magic at home, and they go and grab the seventh seed. Unfortunately, whoever ends up winning this game, they end up going and playing the Celtics in the playoffs. So I would bet on them losing that matchup, but I do think the Hawks can squeak one by here and pull out the win.
I'm definitely hoping for that. I think it's easier to hope that the Hawks win the first game and not even worry about a second game because as much as a fan, I'd like to believe if they lost this one, they would win the second one. You just never know, which is the beauty of the play-in tournament, and I think is really exciting. And so, who is your pick in this game? Oh, you said the Hawks already. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
taking the Hawks in this matchup. It'll definitely be a close game. It could come down to, the last couple minutes, but I'm sticking with my Hawks here. I think they have the veteran leadership in Trae Young. He's been there before. Paolo Banchero just hasn't. So, uh, you know, I'm picking the underdogs here. So I could very much be wrong, but biasly, I'm taking the Hawks.
well, I love the pick personally. So thinking about that, the 9 and 10 matchup, the Bulls and Heat. What's going on there? Who you got?
This one's a little bit more interesting. The Bulls, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but they have been on a roll to end the season. Out of their last 13 games, they've won 10 of them. And Josh Giddey has really stepped it up. You have the Chicago. They swept the Heat in the season series, so I do think they have the clear advantage here. The Heat obviously traded away Jimmy Butler, um, and I don't like the package that they got back. But the Heat are known for, their defensive prowess, where they just try to slow the opponents down, and they're going to try to keep this a very low scoring game. I do think the Heat have the advantage here, where they do have that veteran experience that the Bulls don't have. I mentioned earlier, the Bulls traded away DeMar DeRozan uh, during the offseason before the season started, and then they traded away Zach LaVine to the Kings. I think that they, you know, still have solid pieces there, but it just made their team that much younger. Like you're relying on Lonzo Ball and Josh Giddey to lead you to the playoffs. Personally, this is kind of a boring matchup. Chicago is currently favored at 150 or minus 115. So obviously it could go both ways. If I had to pick who was going to win, the Bulls have just been on an absolute heater. So I do think they end up knocking out the Heat here. And then this hypothetical would lead to the Bulls playing the Magic for that last eighth seed, where I do think the Magic's defense will be able to sustain a very young, unexperienced Bulls team. So yeah, I think the defense will just end up being too much for them, and the Magic end up stealing that eighth seed.
So a lot of people have been saying, and it seems like you might be in the same opinion, in the East, you'd rather be playing the Cavs than the Celtics, even though the Cavaliers are the 1 seed.
I I don't know if I quite believe that. I've been a big fan of the Cavs over the last few years. I do know that obviously Jason Tatum got the monkey off of his back last year. And that he finally got that title that he's been searching for, but he didn't end up winning Finals MVP. I don't think that's a huge indicator of what Jason Tatum did or didn't do during that playoff run. But I do think that he is a playoff faller when it comes to like big games. He's had an incredible season this year. He is not in my top three in MVP, but he's certainly like four or five. But I just love what the Cavs bring. I think they have a great defense. I think they have a great offense. You see Darius Garland really turning it on this year, which he was sort of lacking last year. We didn't know if he was going to be on the team. I heard rumors that they were looking to trade him in the offseason. I'm really glad they ended up not finding a good trade that fit them, and they brought back that core four. And then obviously they traded for our guy DeAndre Hunter. I think he brings a much needed like defense, a defensive wing that the Cavs have sort of been lacking over the last few years. And he's also been just shooting the lights out of the ball, you know. So I personally like the Cavs more than the Boston Celtics. That's probably a hot take here, but yeah, I don't think trying to avoid the Celtics for the Cavs is necessarily a smart idea here.
I agree. I think if you were at any point trying to avoid anybody, then why play the game? Realistically, you should be going in to win every game you have the possibility to, and then going in the house and doing what you have to do. I'm sure
Exactly.
playing in TD Garden is a little bit different than playing in Cleveland, but realistically, I mean, we've seen Cleveland get behind their teams before when LeBron was there, and this is the best team they've had since LeBron left. So why not? See what they have to bring to the table. I think they have a lot of great players, and I'm excited to see what they do in the playoffs. So we've went through all the games, and you've made all your picks. What's your boldest prediction for these play-in games before we start the playoffs next week?
I've got a bold prediction that sort of takes into account the playoffs as well. We were talking a little bit earlier about this team where you just have this intense veteran leadership. You have a former MVP candidate who has been in the highest stakes games over his career. You just added a very, very known playoff riser who steps up to the occasion, and you've got the defensive player of the year, assumably, on your squad right now, and that is the Golden State Warriors. Uh, if they end up making the play in or winning the play in and getting that spot, they would end up going up against a very young Houston Rockets team who is the second seed. Um, I think when you have Steph Curry playing the way that he can play, you have Jimmy Butler who can turn it on to a whole nother level. And you just have this team that has been there before. They obviously won a few titles during the 2010s. They also won another one at the beginning of the 2020s. So it's we see a different team here than we did like the historic KD Warriors, but that doesn't mean that they lack that experience in the playoffs. If you look at what the Warriors have done since they've acquired Jimmy Butler, they've gone 15-8 down the stretch here. So they are winning games and they're doing it by a large margin. Obviously, they lost that really close game last night to the Clippers that came up short there. But I mean, everybody can have that little lapse of, you know, being locked in. I think that loss will probably end up doing good things for the Warriors. I think they realize, like, hey guys, like we got to get it together. So my bold prediction is that the Warriors can end up making a run like the 2023 Heat did. I don't know if they end up making the playoffs here, but there is absolutely a world where the Warriors go on this nice long postseason run and end up making the Western Conference Finals.
I think that's completely possible. I mean, like you said, I mean, if they didn't go 15-8, they're probably not even sitting at a 7 seed. So forget the loss yesterday. I mean, they've given themselves a chance with the trade deadline to put themselves in contention to at least make the playoffs. And I think that's the first step. The next step is making it. And as we've already talked about, the Heat did in 2023. Any team has a chance to make a run. That's why it's a best of 7 game series. And I'm really looking forward to what it's going to take this year. So thank you, King Jing, for sharing all of that. If anybody would sit down and like and subscribe, we want to talk about more things like this. If you have any interest in things like this, we will be talking more about the playoffs here shortly. And definitely comment with your thoughts. Do you think we're on point with what we're talking about? Do you have any questions when it comes to the plan? Anything that we can answer in a future video? Definitely feel free to like and subscribe, as I said, and appreciate the time. Peace.
Peace.